grew up in the evangelical, charismatic, apostolic world of Christianity. If you're familiar with churches like Morning Star, Bethel, International House of Prayer in Kansas City, then you might also know what I'm talking about. If you're less familiar with these ministries, you might know them better as the ones that have produced what you might have heard called a Trump prophet. These are the guys that have been going around saying that God has ordained Donald Trump to be president of the United States of America. This is also the movement that is frequently photographed worshiping in the White House or taking pictures in the Oval Office, laying hands on Donald Trump and praying for him. A bit of a bombshell has dropped this week, however, that has deeply impacted a lot of these ministries and a lot of the people that look to these ministries as their spiritual source. There's a 5-hour video that's been put out by a biblical apologist named Mike Winger, and in it, he drops some incredibly damning information about one of the top prophetic voices from this movement. His name is Shawn Bolz. Shawn Bolz was known for his so-called prophetic gifting. He would go from church to church, conference to conference, even stadiums, and he would pray and claim that God gave him a word for somebody in the crowd. He would then proceed to call out a specific first and last name or a birthday or an address, and somebody would stand up and say it was them, and then he would deliver the word from God and say that he got all of this information from speaking to God. Now, I know to a lot of us this just sounds absolutely insane, and it's silly to think that anybody would listen to this, but you have to understand that these people are primed and they genuinely believe that Shawn is speaking on behalf of a God. And so they take him very seriously. Now stories have come out that there were people that got married because of words that Shawn gave. There were people that invested their finances in certain ways because of a word that Shawn gave, and even more intense stuff. In this 5-hour video, I watched the whole thing. Mike did an excellent job laying out all of the information. There are allegations, and it definitely appears to be true, that Shawn was data mining, getting all of his information about these people off of places like Facebook. So he would get a list of who was going to be at the conference or at the event. He would look at the hashtags, go find some random people and get information about them, and then pretend when he was on stage like God was giving him that information. Again, to those of us that are skeptical, we look at that and we're like, of course. But these people are really, really primed for this stuff. Now people have shared stories where they were in abusive situations or they lost lots of money because they listened to these words that they believed to be from God because they were so detailed. And how could Shawn know things like their address and phone number? That had to have been from God, right? Obviously, I think that this is incredibly harmful. It's obviously fraud, and it is disgusting, and one of the reasons I advocate for skepticism and for thinking critically and for leaning on your own understanding, not just taking somebody's word for something. Who knows what kind of damage that he's caused to people's lives. But there's worse. Also, viewer discretion, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about SA in this next part. In this video, Mike shares that different victims have come forward. I think it's at least 10 men so far, sharing that when they worked for Shawn as a personal assistant, they would be going on work trips with him, meaning they're going to conferences, going to church events. They would share a hotel room with Shawn, and he would insist on walking around naked in front of them, and then he would masturbate in front of them and ask them to come rub his shoulders and other things that obviously made them deeply uncomfortable and was incredibly inappropriate, went completely against their consent, not to mention is super hypocritical of his own views of the gay community, which he's been awful about, so all of this hypocrisy is just wild. Now, obviously, Mike covers a lot more detail and goes into the facts that he's gathered in that 5-hour video, so if you want more information, you can watch that. I'll put the link in the description. Interestingly enough, there's another video just before that one about another similar prophet named Bob Hartley. His own son has come forward and uncovered that he was also doing the same data mining where he was getting his prophetic words off of Facebook or by asking around and was, of course, faking these prophetic words that he was giving people. However, he was also using those prophetic words to get women to sleep with him or to interact with him. And he was allegedly sexually harassing a bunch of women as well. Mike has a video on that where he talks to some of the victims as well. Now here's where things get even more interesting. In this 5-hour video, Mike shares some screenshots of text messages, he shares voice messages, he shares recordings, and he shares timelines showing that the majority of the apostolic leaders, including specifically Bill Johnson and Kris Vallotton, knew about all of this, and they didn't do anything. Now, why does that matter? They are largely responsible for creating these prophetic careers that these guys had. They platformed them, they invited them to all of their conferences. Bob Hartley had a home right near the Bethel church. They were fully involved. Bill Johnson, in 2023, years after he heard about the worst allegations about Shawn Bolz, was on TBN endorsing Shawn's book. But in these text messages and emails and all of that Mike talks about, it seems that Bill and Kris very much knew and agreed that Shawn was not a safe person for others to be around, and they quietly stopped platforming him in their own church. So they didn't invite him to conferences, they didn't let him, speak at their school of ministry, but they didn't share any of this publicly at all. Meanwhile, Shawn's ministry has still been growing. He's still putting out books, he's still selling things online to learn how to hear from God, and is going on with his grift because nobody has publicly outed him and revealed what all has been going on and said, hey, this isn't okay. He has been abusing people and harassing people, and he needs to be deplatformed. I was a student at Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. One of my last interactions with a pastor was with Kris Vallotton when I was on my way up to stage to lead worship, just before I realized I don't believe in any of these things anymore. So while obviously I care about religious trauma and spiritual abuse, and I want to see an end to that, this is not just that for me. This is personal. I knew these people. I was around all of them. I was a part of this ministry. And I'm so grateful that I got out because it was abusive and toxic. And one of the teachings I remember them going on and on about all the time was this thing called the culture of honor, meaning you're not supposed to basically say anything bad about any spiritual leaders because that's not honoring to them. So when Mike's video came out, I didn't have that much hope that Bethel would actually respond and say anything worthwhile, because I have watched them over and over and over again with all kinds of abusers sweep it under the rug, and in many cases continue to platform them. What I didn't think they would do is put out something that was even worse than if they had ignored it altogether. A couple of days after the video came out, Kris Vallotton preached a message at Bethel. I went and watched that whole thing as well, and it was awful. The message was a masterclass on manipulation. The entire thing was just absolutely gaslighting his congregation and basically telling them that we should have pity on abusers and almost zero mention of any victims. He poisoned the well and talked about how people just go out and say things and slander people to make money. Meanwhile, Mike's video is not monetized, and this message from Kris was monetized. There was like 8 commercials. Now, the encouraging part is that the comment section on that video are all seeing through this. They are all calling him out for it and saying that this is absolutely wrong. Why does Bethel continue to do this? Why is Kris the one saying something? Why is Bill not saying anything at all when he's the head of everything? From my perspective, it seems like they don't want to create a culture where leaders are actually held accountable for what they do. They want a culture of untouchable authority.